Women might have done some hunter-gathering, might have picked up vegetables and put the food together.
Sure.
They might have set up sort of an area where they lived for a short term, and then when they exhausted the facilities of that area, they moved on to another area. So that was a communistic system. It lasted for 1 million years. At one point, humans decided it's better if you have the right conditions to settle in one place and grow food in that one place, take animals and use the animals that had milk, use the animals for meat, etc. So they produced a first system of a tribe, called tribalism. Not even tribalism, but that sort of beginnings of tribalism. So they settled. Then another group of human beings came to that, and they came across this local tribe and decided they're onto a good thing. They've got everything grown here, they've got animals, we're still hunter-gatherers, they're a much better situation.
Right.
We're going to join, but the problem is they decided to join them with aggression, because they said, we're going to take over, we don't need you, we're going to take all this for ourselves. This was the beginning of tribalism. So different groups with different tribes, and they fought each other. The first time in human history, human beings killed each other. No other animals do that. People say, oh yes they do, but they don't. They fight each other, they don't rarely kill each other. Very rarely do they kill each other. By accident they may, but they don't deliberately kill each other. They fight in a sort of formal way in order to gain control. Human beings actually killed each other. And not only did they do that, but they caught other human beings and made them their slaves and made them work. And they can lay back and enjoy the proceeds of that oil. So this was the beginning of slavery, the beginning of a class system.
So just for clarification, so at what point have you moved from your definition of communism now, like of that being described, what is communism in your view and what's not communism?
I'm trying to get communism comes at a much later stage.
Oh, okay, right.
We talk about prehistory, the time before tribalism. The beginning of history was the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution was the first revolution where human beings participated. They established villages and
towns and
all the rest of it. Then we had this tribalism. That developed into slavery because some of the human beings were fighting others and they captured them and used them as slaves. That was the beginning of slavery. And slavery lasted quite a long time. Slavery built the pyramids. Slavery did lots of good things in its own way, but it meant it exploited other human beings. So there were two classes, the slave class and the slave owner class. That developed eventually into feudalism. It was the ruling class, if you want to call them that, and they went back and decided that they could settle with these, get these slaves to become workers on the land. They took control of the land and made these peasants, these ordinary workers, slaves, into free slaves. His sons give them the land, they work the land on the understanding that the slaves, the workers, the peasants, belong to the feudal class, the aristocracy as well. And that was a system which lasted for quite a while. It developed, but eventually that system became inefficient. And the typical example is America. The United States of America was to do with southern parts of America, slave society. The northern part were more progressive. They were the beginning of a capitalist society where people were paid to do work, and the people who owned them, or owned this industry and everything else, got profits from them. The South were not like that. The South was still feudalistic in the sense that they had the fields and cotton, they owned the big houses and everything, and they had these slaves. But really, the United States realized that the United States was in the United States of America. They had one system. That system had to be a capitalist system, where you get rid of slavery, free the slaves, make slaves into workers, and pay their farmers. Workers and have them as slaves, because slaves cost money. Even though they're free, they have to be fed, they have to be helped, they have to be looked after like machines, they have to be oiled, they're kept fairly healthy in order to work. Workers, on the other hand, are paid money and they can buy their own accommodation, buy their own food, they don't care about workers, they have money, they pay them this money, you get on with it. That's what I did in Britain in 1648, when there was the English Revolution, where the old feudal system was done away with by the rising bourgeois class of merchant and industrial life. And that developed into a very efficient capitalist system, which did really good things, the railways and the rest of it. So that's the system we have now. However, in the late part of the 18th, 19th century, the working class started to develop the ideas of a society where the working class would solve the wealth, they could get all the benefits for the waste of the wealth that they produced. Why should they need a capitalist to take the money and get profits? And they're the ones that do all the work. So the ideas of socialism and communism arose. In the 19th century, Marx and Engels were the main beginnings of the ideas of communism. Decided, yes, you could have a society where working people actually control everything, get rid of the capital, just like the capital got rid of the thing with people who get yourself. Two classes, why not just have one class? One class in the entire world would be the same if the one class in straight class. However, the difference, of course, is you've gone through all this development, you have all this industry, you can actually produce everything in abundance. You can produce enough of everything under a system if you had that control of economic facilities. And so the ideas of socialism came about, particularly at the end of the 19th century. The Bolsheviks, as they were the majority part of the Russian Social Democratic Movement, which was the majority is Bolshevik means majority. Menshevik means minority. Split into majority Bolsheviks and minority or Menshevik. The Bolsheviks were headed by Lenin and all the other guys. And then in 1905 there was a revolution which didn't succeed. In the process of that revolution, all these working class people set up what was called Soviets. Soviets just another council, workers' council. So they have a like a council here, but they were workers' councils, and they were set up in effect after the first revolution in 1905. But that revolution was destroyed by the Tsars. A lot of it was blamed by the Jews. Quite split. So in 1905, in 1917, or February 1917, was another huge revolution because the Russia was part of the war, and the war was going very badly for Russia. Peasants and workers fought themselves. Why are we fighting this war against our brothers in Germany? We're the same as us, or my brothers in other countries. All the workers of the world are the same. They're the same. Why should we kill each other for the sake of the profits? So they can make profits out of armaments. So they had a revolution in the early part of 1917 where the Labour Party, in fact, the Labour Party took control. So the Labour Party said, well, we're going to continue with the war. We want to continue with the war. That's your Russia. And the Bolsheviks said, no, Bolsheviks, the workers are international. We don't want revolution just one people. We want revolution throughout the world. The only way we can make it strong. That's what happened in October. What do you think later on? Others, later people, Labour the first and their idea was to go forward, that's forward into communism, because communism wasn't possible in those days. Russia, many countries, were so poor and so backward, they couldn't possibly have a society where you could produce everything to abundance and therefore do away with money altogether, because if you have so much of everything, it loses value. It doesn't cost any money. So communism, equal communism. Communist communism is a totally different from what everyone else calls communist. So communism never existed in the Soviet Union. It's not even socialism because it was so backward, so oppressed by the outside world, by the counter-revolutionaries in the outside world. It was basically destroyed. Even though it hung on, never really gets established itself to go forward. It's so effective by the outside. It would still need to be destroyed. That's why we have to go. Russia, which is no longer a socialist system, which is now part of the capitalist world. The point is, what we have now is that we have the Western imperialists, that is America, Britain, France, possibly Germany. These very few countries which are still very imperialistic countries and still want to take control of Russia and China in every France, because that's the way they think.
So, look, I would lay out a general paradigm, because you've laid out a paradigm. I think the communist socialist paradigm, when it comes to human nature, is flawed. And I think that's why it fails economically, politically, and culturally. So I'll give you an example. Can we stick to, say, The Great Leap Forward by Mao? Right? Now, The Great Leap Forward, it was a theory of the communal society, the idealistic man, living in that sort of way. And what they did throughout China is they set up communes where collectively people worked. And it led to the deaths of millions of people. And likewise, if we go to all the other Soviet or communist or socialist states, they've done something similar over periods of time. The fundamental issue seems to be that they cannot diagnose the human condition. They cannot explain how it is that human beings are going to be motivated to work if everybody gets paid the same and if there isn't some form of hierarchy. So this is why I believe that even if you look at Cuba today, if a doctor gets paid the same as a janitor, why would you want to be a doctor?
If you really want to be a doctor,
But it doesn't work.
it does.
I break those two things apart because some people, for example, will, even to the detriment of income, will chase down something, some dream, and try and invent something. Like some people are driven, I think, other money and that sort of stuff. Whereas the hierarchy problem is deeply fundamental. Because what you've got is a group of people trying to live together. You can't have everyone operate as a single hive mind who agrees on everything.
Yeah.
And so at some point there needs to be some system of laws and regulations and they need to be enforced. And whoever and however that comes about becomes a de facto class distinction.
The thing is with human nature, I've had this argument at times, human nature is not static,
Yeah.
not built. Human nature depends entirely on your environment. And human nature of science society is totally different from the human nature of society, which is totally different from that.
So we have a different paradigm of human nature. We believe there is innate nature and it's purely a purpose.
And it's a bit of an interface.
So the thing
So it goes back.
there's a nature which is a negative thing.
No, not a negative thing, just that there is something innate about human behaviour and then that interacts with the environment, rather than being a tabula rasa entirely shaped by the environment.
So I'll give you, so to make it easier, just one small thing. So you have Rousseau's ideas, this egalitarian human nature, then you have the Hobbesian idea, right? Which one are you more closely aligned to?
Hakim was sort of anti-imperialist. He was a historian of note.
Right.
He wasn't a Marxist.
Right.
So therefore he interpreted things in a different way. Which you have done with this thing about Mao. Now in Mao's China, at the time, it was a very, very backward feudal society. It's impossible to move from a feudal society to a feudal society just like you're bypassing the whole development of capitalism. So what the problems China and the same problems in Russia and Soviet was that they were starting from a very, very low basis, a very almost a feudal society, going from that to a communist society is just simply impossible. So what they did in this is what happened in the Soviet Union. What has happened in China is when the Communist Party, the Bolshevik Communist Party decided that in order to get to a more advanced secular society, you had to allow a certain amount of capital. It was the new economic policy. And people that took advantage of that economic policy were capitalists. Not nicknames, but capitalists. They were called nicknames. And they were exploiting the situation that was just dying. Because let's face it, the Civil War, which occurred immediately after the 17th Revolution, that was the 1920s, was a horrific event in Russia. Many people died. The West invaded, the United States and Britain invaded on the side of the Tsarist white and Bolsheviks with a red army, and they fought a terrible civil war. In the process, Russia was absolutely devastated. There's no way you could have an advanced industrial socialist society in those circumstances.
Okay, but so, can I say something? You're narrowing down the failures of these Soviet states to historically contingent events. If we have a blank slate, I would say it wouldn't actually work despite those economic conditions not being there. And the reason is because the human nature diagnosis that they've given to what we are like as humans is a man-made construct, and it's a construct in which they have not captured the essence of humanity. So, for example, every single place, whether it's Latin America or Africa or Asia or whatever, where they have tried it at a micro level or a macro level, is led to the same things. And I believe fundamentally it's because they have a system which doesn't accept that. You mentioned materialism before we started filming, right? It's fundamentally, its origin is materialism and naturalism, which is why you can never capture the human being. If you start off with theism, you can capture a better explanation of human nature and therefore a better economic, cultural and political system.
Yeah, so essentially the system's been designed for creatures other than us because it's not designed with humans as they are intelligence.
Well, no, well, what about human nature in the million years before agriculture? What's human nature then? We could see, because they're still, even today, hunter-gatherers societies in South America and sometimes in America.
But
their human nature is totally human. They have no desire to hurt anyone.
they have no desire
They
to.
have no desire to hurt anyone because there's no need to hurt anyone.
And the same is true.
Okay, so what you're doing is that
True for most people in even in the West.
Basically,
but
we're all basically
that's not a sufficient condition for you to say that they believe in a communist ideology.
yeah, but see,
Because that fits well with Islam. That fits well with many
but
ideologies.
the thing is, when you talk about human nature, you've got to take it and analyze it then right back. So it doesn't make it like that. What we think is human nature today is human nature today, but it's not. It's the become of that because all the things that happened in the past is developed into that. In the early stages of human development, in the early stages of prehistory, human nature was totally different. It was very, very much on an equal society.
Okay, so can I just add something to help our conversation? When it came to these communist societies, and you've mentioned it a few times, David, it was about advancement. It was about electricity and railways. Okay? That is the fundamental wrong starting point. Because if the starting point is the material advancement of society, as opposed to something more transcendent, then you're gonna go in the wrong direction from the beginning, which is why the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, and all the other communist initiatives led to mass deaths. Because they
The faith in the capital. It's like the capital is the be-all and end-all of provision, and it's the only way that they can gain security. And there are other ways to gain security if someone else has some degree of ownership over the capital. And the thing is, for me, again, there's this little hierarchy point where we've got to come and look at, say, even in principle, even for many communities, like there emerges different classes, and there are reasons why different classes are. When you've got a small, village, 700 people, 500 people maybe, it's a different scale. We know in mathematical analysis, modelling, whatever, over a certain size of cohabitants population, there's different dynamics in those, and therefore, for it to be stable, different things. We've seen that, as the example I gave, with laws and the enforcement of those. If everyone knows each other and you can talk amongst each other, you don't necessarily need codified law and an enforcement system. Whereas over a certain size it's needed, and then there's necessarily some other classes. So how could it in principle deal with that?
Yeah.
Take an example of China. China's gone through all this business with Mao's very backward society. Actually, decided the only way to develop is to allow a certain amount of backwards.
Okay, so just one small point. You said it was backward, but at the time Shanghai wasn't backward. And that was due to capitalism.
When I use backward, I mean backward in economic terms. I mean, our society is backward compared to the capitalist society because of economics. The economics of capitalism is inefficient compared with economics.
You don't think that the British opium trade had anything to do with why it was economically inferior? I think there's a danger of doing a sort of one-issue narrative of saying it's
That's important what you said, because China realized that to its own expense imperialism, particularly British imperialism, has been a terrible, terrible effect on China. And it doesn't want to have anything to do with imperialism. And yet, China is the most advanced country in the world. With all this propaganda.
Imperialism is longer than the existence of Britain.
Since the last 100 years, the development of China since 1948 when the Communist the development means even today the Communist Party is and they actually have a society which allows a certain amount of capital for the benefit of the Chinese people. And that's important. And when China goes into Africa and goes in England as what the West called imperialism, it's not imperialism. It's actually doing something useful in the world, and actually in return they get friendship and they get cooperation from the people they're giving the help to.
With the debt trap caveat, I reserve judgment on how altruistic.
Well, if you're talking about Africa or other parts of the world which are really poor, it's all to do with
Well, that's what I meant. So colonialism, primarily it proceeded with debt traps and followed those up to development. Well, this is why I'm saying we need to perhaps reserve judgment because what they've done is a different way of inserting various kind of debt traps where when those debts can't be serviced, they end up getting the land, the ports, the railways. So that's sort of the precursor to authority. It may turn out that de facto or functionally they're not black. We don't yet know yet.
I don't know.
I just wanted to give that caveat.
What is China? Is it a socialist society or is it a capitalist society? It's not an easy question because
I think that's not going to work as a framing. We're using European framing to judge a different society. They are their own thing.
Yeah. But what is important, and the same with Russia, is that neither China nor Russia are imperialist in the way that the West is. The West's imperialism is utterly destructive. They're bombing Iraq and exterminating. They're bombing Libya. They're bombing Afghanistan. They're bombing it.
To be fair, the Soviets did the same in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan. Well, there's plenty of evidence to show wide-scale destruction of religious institutions, of all these centers of learning, the Holodomor. What was that about in Ukraine?
I can ask you this. You believe in Islam, you're a Muslim. So, this is the main. I'm not saying it's bad. There's the main problem. The Marxists and all other idealistic philosophers. Right. Because the idealistic philosophers believe the ideas come before materialism. So therefore the ideas are inborn. We're born with these ways of thinking because God made us this way. And where materialists believe that it's a simple part of the development of the world and their ideas come from their material situation. So the way we think, and you think and I think and everyone thinks depends on the situation.
So you've made a brilliant point there, and that's exactly where I want you to get to. Did you hear what he said there? So what he basically said is our starting points are different. So for example, as a Muslim, my starting point is innate knowledge. And innate knowledge or what you called abstract knowledge, right? Your starting point, you're saying is the material world or the material experience of humanity. What I would say to that is firstly, when it comes to us speaking about our biological inheritance, we can go down the line of say evolution and say, okay, so we evolved our faculties under environmental selection pressures, and then we can have a complete materialistic story from A to Z. That will not lead to a communist mindset. If anything, that would lead to the selfish gene perspective and the complete opposite of what the communists claim is the human nature. Because from a Darwinian perspective, their idealistic human nature is not found in nature. Nature is read in tooth and claw. You see, now from the Islamic perspective, we believe we have what's known as the fitrah, this innate disposition in which we know right and wrong. Society may color it. However, if you're going to be a consistent communist, you cannot try and ground the human nature that the communists want to have through biology, because biology gives you the opposite of what the communists claim is out there. Because they believe in altruism, they believe in empathy, they believe in sympathy, but that's not the Darwinian picture.
I think
But so you're talking. This is going to be impossible to sort of decide.
Oh, go ahead.
Because if you can imagine, it's not hard to have a society where money doesn't exist.
Say that again?
Have a society where money doesn't exist.
certainly in imagination, because we know they
Have a society where money doesn't exist. But all the things that we use, eat, and have are mass produced. There's enough food for everyone. There's enough water for everyone. There's enough cars, there's enough transport, there's enough everything for everyone. And when you have a society where there's so much of everything, the value of that commodity disappears.
We've got to be very careful with words here, because you can have a society without money and not have a society without value. So we can't mix the terms.
Well, no, you're right. See,
That's a good point.
Marxism, value exists only because what we consider to be what it is considered. Money has no value. Money has no value. All money is paper and something. It's just figures. Money doesn't exist.
Right.
It really does not.
And that's only true of modern fiat currencies. Like money, for example, in Muhammad Islam was actual silver.
Silver and gold exists, and that's why the whole system of capitalism is in crisis.
So let's be careful with fiat currency.
Okay, so going back to my main contention. Yeah, sure.
If you have a society where there's no money, because the value is gone with that. Well, if you have too much money, it goes down, except the capitalism deliberately artificial people. But if you didn't have capitalism, values of things would go down to something which is money. It's worthless, have no value other than itself. In other words, if you have something, this thing is gold, if you have something which has an innate value in its own right, then that has value. The value is not a monetary.
Okay, so can we ignore money for now and stick to communication? But all societies have communication. The fundamental point I'm making is the communist worldview is inherently incoherent because the idealistic view that they have of human nature, okay, I'll explain why it is, cannot be found in the materialistic genesis story of humanity's origin, which communists believe in, which is the Darwinian story. So communication, from a Darwinian perspective, as Dawkins says in The Selfish Gene, is manipulation of the signal receiver by the signal sender. All form of communication is manipulation for survival and reproduction. So when the communists say, well, we had this idealistic small society and now we have all this injustice and we need to go back to that, what they're forgetting is that if you believe in materialism and naturalism, the human nature that you get from that worldview does not fit what the communists claim human beings are like. There's an inherent incoherency in their view of human nature.
Because the word idealistic here misused. A communist doesn't have an idealistic point of view as a totally materialist point of view. The idealistic point of view that the idea comes before material, as opposed to the materialist idea that material comes before idealism. Idealism is religion, such as yours. Materialism is a communist idea. But the idea of human nature being a static, basic thing that we're born with simply is not true. The only thing babies are born with, they have no idea of the world at all. They have no idea of nothing. All they have is, there are 6 basic instincts, and I can never remember them. One is basically self-preservation, which is a natural reaction to danger. The other is the instinct to suck, mother's love. The third is to excrete. The fourth is to eat. And I can't remember the sixth. But basically, very, very, very few. Unlike most animals, the vast, in fact, all other animals, the difference is that human beings are different from all other animals, that they do not survive on their instincts. All other animals do. So therefore, human beings have this different brain pattern where they have no ideas of anything until they're taught those ideas, either from their parents or from society or from the environment.
But the thing is, that is pure ideology, which is simply inconsistent with what we know about brains. Because when these ideas were made, it was based on this idea that humans were a tabula rasa. that can be brought up in any kind of way.
Blank slate.
Society can change them in any kind of way. People are blank slate, right? So it's really, big ones. But what we found is, the fact is that human brain is incredibly complex. It has built-in specific systems to deal with social systems. There's a specific actual hierarchy system in the brain. Well, no, I mean, this is just a fact. This isn't a matter of opinion.
To give you a crazy study, right, or series of studies, people's moral behavior has changed due to brain injuries. And that's one of the strongest pieces of evidence to show that there's innate modules.
Not only that, we can specifically map the particular, watch the brain parts activate in relation to hierarchical relationships, social relationships, the way they relate to fear responses and empathy. It turns out that the brain is incredibly
pre-programmed.
Incredibly structured in terms of the predisposition to act this way. Now, society can modify that, but it's not modifying a blank slate. It's modifying something with a definite class of people. No,
this is science.
This isn't opinion. This is where we differ.
Because it's whatever's your coach, some pseudoscience.
No, I mean, this is just standard neurology, standard neuroscience, and cognitive neuroscience. Like, I mean, you can just go look at.
And by the way, this fits well with our view of humanity's origin. As in, from our theistic worldview, humanity having this innate disposition for good, and this innate ability to distinguish right and wrong, which is why I believe any worldview which comes without God will always lead to the sort of atrocities that we saw with the communists.
People believe in God, of course, they have produced atrocities as well. There's plenty of evidence.
No, I'm not saying religious people can't be violent. I'm saying a worldview that begins with materialism will get human nature wrong.
Well, you believe in God.
Yes.
You believe, and you presume as well, you believe that humans were produced by God. Well, I believe that human beings are part of the development of all animals. Human beings came from the eighth family. The eighth family were the highest before humans. The eighth family were the highest intelligence. The most intelligent were the bonobo apes, which are the closest to humans. Now, the difference is with the bonobo apes and humans, the main difference is the hands. The hands have produced the human brain. Because when animals such as humans had hands and could do things with their hands, that completely changed the genetic order. Because bonobo apes and apes in general do not change. They stay as apes until they may disappear. But all animals stay as animals. Human beings change. And the way they change is because of their hands. But when a human being can actually use their hands and make weapons, make tools, make things, make a house, do all the things using their hands and playing music and doing the writing and everything else. That is what made human beings. Because up until that moment, human beings existed only because of that skill of their hands.
Okay, but there's some recalcitrant facts. There's some facts which go against your ideas that you've just proposed. If that was truly humanity's origin, then right now, me and you, David, would only be focusing on survival and reproduction. But we focus on philosophy, moral worth, economic theories, empathy, sympathy, things which don't fit that Darwinian story of origin.
One thing even more important than that is...
Let me just say this, because my point.
See you later.
Because of our development economically and socially and in every other way, because of our hands producing things right up to the moment now, we can produce amazing things. Our processes actually affected our brains and made us think the way we are now. Nothing else has changed other than those developments.
So you've got
made human beings.
You need to explain it.
To see something that's something really important that's happened here. Because remember before you were essentially arguing for the tabula rasa. Now you're for the
blank slate
shaped by society and you're essentially a blank slate for society. You were saying the opposite. But if this evolutionary theory is what you're saying, and like you just said, affects our brains, well then the outcome would be that our brains have structure, function built into it. That therefore it's not a blank slate. We can't, there's literally that one key contradiction.
Good point.
War. Human beings, even today, all the propaganda, all the things, do not want to go to war. It's absolutely instinctive that human beings do not kill each other. They want to kill each other.
Yep.
So why do you say? Is that why human beings kill each other? Why do they do that? Because they have an innate reason to kill each other? No. The reason why they do it is because they're brainwashed into doing it by the capitalist ruling class or any other ruling. They say to them, you've got to go to war with this country because that country is your enemy. And even worse, there's a person in that country who leads that country. It's a terrible dictator. It's a terrible person. You must go to war to stop that. We're going to preserve ourselves from the attack. They're going to destroy us unless we destroy them first. Well, that's what war is. And then the other part of war is the economic reason for war. Because lots of money being made from war always has.
Yes, the reasons given and that are used to manipulate people into going to war are very rarely for that.
But also, if human nature is warlike and destructive to kill other human beings, then we would all be at war with each other all at the time.
Sure. So let me so this book I finished called Strategic Insights by Dominic Johnson, right? He speaks about this exact topic, right? What he does is he says, okay, how do we explain war? How do we explain collective violence? And coming from a materialistic worldview, which he does, which you also believe in, he boils it down to our cognitive biases. So evolution has given us biological inheritance, which leads to these cognitive biases, which is why we go to war. So what you're trying to say is this society. But like I've been pointing out to you, it's not society. It is actually, if you believe in the Darwinian story, then it's due to Darwinism itself. Because remember, going back to the ideas of Thomas Malthus, from whom Darwin got the idea of natural selection. You have too much population, not enough supply. So you have a competition, right? You have a competition. And that competition is what leads to the evolution of life. So that evolution is going to not only affect us physiologically, it's going to affect us psychologically, which is where the field of sociobiology comes in and evolutionary psychology comes in. And that's why people like Dominic, whatever his name is, he's arguing that all of this war that we have in the world is simply due to our biological inheritance. So being a materialist, you cannot point it down to it's the socialization of humanity which leads to warfare. It's not. And this is why the fundamental contradiction between the communist idea of human nature and their commitment to naturalism and materialism. Do you understand my point, though?
I do, but you're missing out the whole point of class contradictions. Human beings do not want to go to war. To know in the Second World War, most British soldiers said they didn't shoot at the Germans, they just shot in the air because they didn't want to kill them. But it's not natural to kill another human being. The only way you can kill another human being is to treat that person as an animal, which is a bad thing, and he must be destroyed.
Okay,
but the laws to get.
Can I just add just one small thing, Devon? Why is it that you have all these evolutionary academics, and most of them are militant atheists? And remember, the Soviets and the communists were very big on teaching Darwinism.
And atheists.
Why is it that they are in a consensus that human beings' ability and their drive, their inclination for war is a biological inheritance? So I gave you one example of Dominic Johnson, but there's lots of academics. You have Tooby, right? You have E.O. Wilson. You have all these academics going back from the 70s to now who've done study after study after study using the materialistic paradigm, and they've come to the conclusion this is the Darwinian imperative. So what I'm saying to you is you can't be a consistent communist and a Darwinist.
I'm not this misinterpreted Darwinism. Social Darwinism is a very dangerous idea. The Nazis also.
They did.
They used it.
So did the French and the British.
Yes. Very reactionary interpretation of Darwinism.
So did Stalin. He applied it to social classes.
Well, totally against that.
No, that's fine.
Anyhow, point is, the idea that you are putting forward is an idea, such ideas because you believe people are born with these instincts.
No, this is what the Darwinists are saying.
Let's take this back a sec. Let's deconstruct this.
But they're materialists, so they have to be Darwinists.
Let's take this back a step and deconstruct it a bit, because nobody is saying that humans, like these ogres from Lord of the Rings, who are just built for war and death. What they're saying is that built into human nature, where you've got this social bond, you're trying to socially bond with people, and then you also have fear, and then you have things like flocking and the follower effect. They're saying that given the basic priors of human nature, then given the mechanics that lead to brute wars, there is a predisposition, and they're very likely to go into it. That's what's more like. It's not like everyone's crazy murderous ogres.
Economic reasons for war. Wars don't just happen.
But economics is just putting a fiat currency blanket over the underlying thing of no, this is really important, because when you say economics, it's really just putting this fiat currency blanket over the underlying do you have enough food? Do you have enough rain? Do you have the metals, the materials to defend yourself?
Let's take an example. Why is there a war in Ukraine? Why is there a war anywhere? Only because in America, which is the country which produces most weapons, makes huge profits of producing those weapons, have to have wars. They have to have wars. So then it's not that anyone in America wants a war, anyone wants it. But the people that control this country and America are the military-industrial complex. And the military-industrial complex is the people that control society. Okay, so therefore, if they are in economic crisis, because they are all the time, they have to have an economy which is based on destruction. Because only by destruction can they reproduce these things that have been destroyed and make a profit. They reproduce them again and again and again ad nauseam.
Okay, so can I
just finish?
Yeah.
Just finish. So therefore, the war in Ukraine was started by America. They took over Ukraine, and the coup in the CIA took over Kiev. They installed a bunch of fascist neo-Nazis who they knew were going to attack Russia, because these neo-Nazis actually hate Russians as a race. These neo-Nazis were very useful to America, because America's idea was also to take over Russia. Because it's economically a great idea to take over Russia from their point of view. So they started this whole process later in Ukraine in order to provoke the Russians into war, which they did, and then let this whole thing go. But they didn't want to do it themselves. There's no real security. The British as well were in Ukraine. But they wanted the Ukrainians to fight the Russians. They could, as always, sit back and make the money from the profits.
Okay, so look.
So therefore, the Ukrainians have been harmed into fighting this war, as other people have harmed into fighting war.
Okay, so
the people that control them.
Okay, so let's go a bit higher. In international relations, there's three main schools. There's the realist schools, realist, liberal, and constructivist, about how states act. The realist school, which is that states just care about security and it's about domination. The liberals, they believe in the idea of the UN, everyone working together, and the constructivists, you can have many different ideas there. From a materialistic point of view, if there is no God, if everything can be explained from a materialistic point of view, the realist school of thought makes most sense. Why? States are run by people. People have leaders. Leaders evolved, and their evolution is what leads to these cognitive biases, or what Dominic Johnson calls strategic instincts, which leads to these types of wars. So what I'm going back to is the same point I made previously. Being a materialist and a communist, there's a fundamental contradiction between what the communists claim human beings are like and what human beings are really like if the Darwinian materialistic naturalistic story is true.
When you say
Do you understand the fundamental
Yeah,
issue here?
well, for me, I would express it slightly differently, perhaps slightly more simply. We'll see if this is the same thing. Essentially, if we look at the observed facts we have of history, the development of societies, we look at the successes and the failures and so on. Particularly, we haven't discussed the Islamic Empire and how it's fundamentally different from European colonialism. And I think those comparisons are important for me because for me, there's essentially two classes of hypotheses. One is Islam is telling the truth, and this is about how human works, and this is why we see what we see. And the other is a various basket of European ideas and materialism, and therein. If I look at the two hypotheses and I match them up to what we see happening, I see that Islam fits very well what we observe, and I also see that it appears to contain a viable solution within that working model. Whereas on the other side, I don't see it fitting the reality so well. There's fudging going on, and I also don't see a viable working solution being proposed.
Because that's the wrong starting point.
Do you agree?
Yeah, that's it. That's what I'm saying.
the first beginning of the premise was erroneous. You say states are controlled by people. They're not. States are controlled by classes. There's a state in this country and in America, lots of countries, states are controlled by capitalist class.
If those classes had no people, then they wouldn't be controlling the people.
People aren't. You're looking at people as individuals. As Thatcher said, there's no such thing as society as individuals. That's not true. There is no such thing as individuals. States are class entities.
No, but this is important because
It's important because you're interacting with people. People don't exist really. They are classes. And when you use the word materials, you're using people.
No, this is really important because you exist, you are a person. I am a person, you are a person. And I know what you're saying, but I need to make this point because if you start on a basis and say individuals do not exist, that is a contradiction. It's flatly a contradiction with reality. So there needs to instead be some way to say, yes, individuals do exist, so you make contact with reality, and then say, but as a collective, then you get some emergent different dynamics as a group that can't necessarily be analysed on the basis of the individual. And that's legitimate. Do you see what I mean? It's really important.
It's exactly what you're saying.
That's a good point.
I should say, really, society exists because it exists as a group of individuals who are split into classes. And their thoughts and processes are dependent on their class. A working class person thinks entirely different from a capitalist. So therefore, a state becomes a state when people, for one way or either a dictatorship or a so-called democracy, becomes a state controlled by people, but the people in that state that control that state are not people in the sense that they are ruling on behalf of a class. And the capitalist class rule through either democracy or dictatorship. There's no difference. There's no difference between democracy and dictatorship because in the end, we all live under dictatorship, capitalist dictatorship. Whether you call it
You get
democracy,
2 or 3 colours in democracy, you only get one colour in a dictatorship. There's no
you don't.
But you know,
the difference of colours, that's what I'm saying. It's
but David, fundamentally, to wrap up,
red and blue.
we've had a good conversation. It was very nice talking to you. You know the perspective me and him are coming from. We're basically saying is theism, which gives you a better economic, political, and cultural worldview, and you believe in materialism. That's the fundamental point of
Tell you
disagreement.
what, when I come to speakers court, I've been coming since I was 17.
Wow.
I'm now 83. So I've been
look good.
all these years. And I always, when I was coming to 17, there were no religious groups. There was no Islamic people. There was no Muslims. There were very few Christians. There were no Jews.
Mostly it's political.
Yeah.
So it's mostly political. There were anarchists, there were communists, there were socialists, there were all sorts. Now, I always made it up my mind when I came in this within the last 20 years, after being away for quite a while, I came last night, by all these different religious groups, and the politicals were over there.
And it's just Heiko.
Yeah,
It's just Heiko.
But I said to myself, after a similar situation, not this conversation, but lots of other conversations, but I was never going to get into an argument with a theist.
Well, so here's
But actually, we spoke about politics, economics, and theism, which is
I was going to bring up another example.
interesting thing.
Libya under Gaddafi. Gaddafi, Libya was an Islamic country.
Yeah.
It was. Gaddafi was one of the best socialists, communists ever, because he ruled Libya on a purely socialistic platform.
well, I think they called it Islamic socialism, which I don't agree with.
I don't agree with either,
Yeah.
because it was deficient in many ways. His important deficiency was the fact that he was a Muslim. But the fact is that you had a society that was far more democratic than most countries. They used to have money from oil, which they would give to people, like they give money to people to buy houses, free education, free health services. Everything was, it was the highest standard of living in Africa, next to Iraq, which also was a very, very high standard of living.
Yeah.
Both Iraq and Libya were very good societies, even though I didn't agree entirely, because I don't agree with the situation in Russia. But basically, what happened? Both Libya and Iraq decided they were going to deal oil in local currencies and not the dollar. That was the reason, and the only reason, why America decided to destroy Iraq and destroy Libya.
We don't disagree there.
Gaddafi was looking to build a gold-backed currency.
By the way, his inspiration, he wouldn't say it was socialism.
He called it socialism. The government of Jamaica or something like that. They, every 6 months, the whole country would close down for everyone to go to a public hall or town hall and to discuss what they were going to do.
He wasn't a materialist.
Yes.
Yeah, no, he wasn't.
Yeah, he wasn't. But this is so, David, it's
interesting.
great speaking to you.
Great speaking to you too. This is just one final thing I wanted to say. This is one of the things that's really interesting about us. As you said, you didn't want to get into too religious conversation because with many people, with many other belief systems, there is a whole separate thing like this. There's politics and real life, and then there's religion. But for us, it's one integrated whole, and that's why we haven't been trying to shoehorn it in. For us, it's a fundamentally integrated
Comes up,
view.
yes, I understand entirely. And I don't, and I say it, and I've said it many times, I would never ever persecute any religion, even though I totally disagree with it. And the mistake that Stalin made was that he persecuted religions.
But doesn't every communist say that?
No, but it's true. But
We've heard this before.
But the point is that Stalin took over in 1924 when Lenin was dying.
Yeah.
And Lenin was dying because Stalin was taken over. And from that moment, the whole situation in Russia changed. The whole situation changed. Up until 1924, so from 17 to 24, even with all the problems, Russia was a progressive country, the most progressive in the world. And in the 30s, when America and Britain was in the slump of thousands and millions were unemployed, in Russia, everyone was working hard to build up society, and they did so.
I understand what you're saying, but people like Stalin, but people like Barrera, who were around the time of the death of Stalin and others, that standing committee type of mindset, it was all the same. Whether Stalin was in charge or someone else was in charge, they were going to do the same thing.
But Stalin believed in socialism in one country. That was his ideology. Communists, real communists and Bolsheviks believed in socialism.
Not quite. I think we are. But it's great speaking to you. Great speaking.
One other thing I wanted to say was, so I used to be atheist. I was raised atheist predominantly. I graduated in theoretical physics, and that's actually, I went in atheist, came out Muslim. So if you ever want to break your rule about not discussing religion, feel free to
We just did.
I mean, specifically looking at materialism and why do I believe it. We can have very interesting.
You finished?